you all had a good afternoon out there with our juggling from this this venue to the outside. And thank you for sticking around. And we are going to spend probably half to 45 minutes, I would presume, on this, John. We'll see. And if it's more interesting, then you know, if you're still interested, we'll stay here longer. But this particular portion of the program is funded in part by the Wisconsin Humanities Council, which, you know, encourages the ability to get this information and education out into the community. They, of course, don't necessarily endorse anything that's said on this stage because they are strictly a funding agency. That being said, we will get started shortly. When we proposed this, we also felt that we could take some of the material that you all just participated in across the street and put it into a video along with some of the remarks that are being said here to create an educational tool that maybe could be used with church groups, with all sorts of groups out in the community, children, and so on and so forth. So, with that being said, I would like to start the program off by introducing John Gerda, who, of course, I think all of you know as, you know, really the chronicler of Milwaukee for so many years. And with us on the stage is Michael Gordon, who is a retired professor of history at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And he's really a champion of oral history. He's done a number of oral histories about people that have been engaged in making history. Michael also did work on the Italian anarchists that were in this Bayview neighborhood, which you know, may or may not come up in this discussion, but it's a very interesting thing if you're interested in Bayview history. And right to my right is Steve Kuperi, who I have known for 40 years, I guess, Steve. Yeah, and so he must have been 3 years old then, right? But Steve comes out of a small local union in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and at the age of 20 or 21 was its president. And he showed lots of promise, and he ended up going to Cornell University and has been involved in the labor movement in a number of ways, and most recently is, I get your titles always mixed up.
Union representative.
I just been calling him a union representative, but with the Wisconsin Education Association Council, WEAC, and of course has been right in the head of this fight. And unfortunately, we're taking him from the phone bag to participate here. So he's a really worker in the field, but he's got a good touch about what the labor movement is all about. So, John, you want to get it started? Thank you very much, John.
I want to say, first of all, that I'm one of the originals of this sort of ad hoc committee that meets once a year to plan this event. And Ken has been our heartbeat for 26 years, and he deserves a round of applause. His steadfast dedication to this event. And Ken will recall that we had, it was actually a labor history meeting at then it was Travis Anvet's post, you know, now the Dean Marini's restaurant. And we had the commemoration right after that, and it snowed. So this is not the worst weather we have had for this commemoration. And what I want to do, you've heard about the event, you've seen it reenacted, and you've heard about from the office holders and prospective office holders a cry to action in the next few weeks. What I want to do is spend most of my time talking about the aftermath of the events of May 5th, 1886. Certainly it was a signal event in labor history, not just here, but nationally. And you might think that after at least 7 people are killed, and you have a city shut down and essentially under martial law, you might have thought that the workers would be cowed, that they would want to stay home and put their lights under a bushel. To show you how staunch the support for this movement was back in 1886, even after deadly force had been leveled here in Bayview, on May 23rd, which is just 3 weeks after the tragedy down here in Bayview, the Knights of Labor, which was the main union organizing the campaign for the 8-hour day without a cut in pay, sponsored a parade that drew 5,000 workers, which was a major proportion of the workforce in Milwaukee back in 1886. They marched on a route that covered 5 miles through the streets of Milwaukee, east side, south side, west side, north side. And what they were doing was declaring that they were not going to be intimidated. They were not going to go away. They were not going to be silenced. And that message came through crystal clear. Robert Schilling was the lead organizer for the Knights of Labor, and he said, not long after the shootings, he said, to put it in plain German, it was a cowardly, premeditated murder. But, Schilling said, labor was not going to respond with violence. He said that the shootings were a call to action. And here's a quote that I think really summarizes the spirit of that movement. The poor victims are dead and buried. They shall be revenged. Not by making blood flow, not through force. The intelligent citizens have a weapon mightier than the ball or the bayonet, the ballot. And that was the beginning of political activism on the part of the labor movement here in Milwaukee that had huge traction in this area. What they organized was something called the People's Party of Wisconsin, right after the shootings of May 1886. And it ran a full slate of candidates in those fall elections. And the results were striking. The populists won a majority of Milwaukee County offices. They won half of Milwaukee's seats in the state assembly. And they sent a millwright named Henry Smith to Congress. So this was a clear vindication of the victims who fell back on May 5th. So Mr. Smith went to Washington. It was a triumph of national importance. No labor-oriented electoral movement in the country did better in those fall elections. But it turned out to be short-lived. It may not surprise you to learn that the Republicans and Democrats turned out to have more in common with each other than they had with labor. So they organized a fusion campaign and ran their own candidates against the People's Party and narrowly won over the People's Party ticket in that year. So the populists faded from the scene, but a seed had been planted. This was something that, again, was not going to go away. Milwaukee workers had been roused to action. Never again, they said, will you take us for granted. Never again will we be silent. And less than a decade later, all that latent energy that had arisen in response to the shootings down here in Bayview led to the socialist movement. And the wayfinder there, the Moses, was a man named Victor Berger. You may have seen an op-ed piece in the paper today about why we don't have something named for Victor Berger in a town where he did so much. He believed in the absolute unity of interest between the party itself and organized labor. And the strength of that movement he called the personal union. And he meant that personally. It was the same people who were involved in labor were involved in the party itself. And that personal union turned out to be something he called the Milwaukee idea. And it was on the basis of that idea that the socialists began to run candidates for office back in 1898. And a small bloc on the Common Council earned a reputation for diligence, creativity, and absolute incorruptibility compared to all the hacks and grafters, the traditional parties in office. So voters learned to trust them. And in 1910, the Socialists had a full slate of candidates, and they swept the elections of 1910. A man named Emil Seidel, who was a pattern maker by trade, became the first socialist to govern a major American city. The Socialist Party took a majority of the seats on Milwaukee's Common Council, and about 2/3 of these guys worked with their hands. This was a working class, worker-oriented, blue-collar movement. And it turned out not to be a fluke. Milwaukee had socialist mayors for most of the next 50 years. Dan Hone from 1916 to 1940, and Frank Zeidler, who was another heartbeat of this event, from 1948 to 1960. And all of these mayors were completely committed to the rights of labor. Back in 1909, even before Seidel got elected, the Socialist Party boycotted the Milwaukee Auditorium dedication because the procession was being led by a non-union band. In 1919, after World War I, when Dan Hone was being asked to welcome the King of Belgium, he said, "To hell with kings, I stand for the man who works." In 1955, on Frank Zeidler's watch, when a ship carrying clay for the strike-bound Kohler plant tried to land in Milwaukee, Frank supported the strikers who refused to let it dock. So labor was the constant, and with labor's backing, the socialists turned the tide here in Milwaukee. They transformed Milwaukee to a boss-ridden, thoroughly corrupt big city into one of the best governed in the entire country. The very idea of public enterprise, of investing in our commonwealth, came to life under the socialists, and its legacy is all around us, in our public parks, in our public services, and the expectations we have of the public officials that we put into office. Underlying that idea was a new spirit, a spirit of solidarity, a spirit of cooperation, a spirit of mutualism, a sense that we are all one people with a common right to dignity, justice, and opportunity. It was that spirit that led the Wisconsin legislature of 1911 to pass pioneering laws in workers' compensation and vocational education. It was that spirit that led to the creation of AFSCME right here in Wisconsin back in 1932. It was that spirit that in 1959 made Wisconsin the first state in America to recognize the right of public employee unions to organize and bargain collectively. Last year, 125 years after the tragedy we mark today, that right to organize and bargain collectively was rescinded by the Wisconsin legislature in a frontal assault on the rights of Wisconsin workers. No shots were fired, no deaths were recorded, but Act 10 was nearly as polarizing as the events that we commemorate in Bayview today. The lessons of 1886 are the same as the lessons of today. Yeah. Our ancestors realized that nothing changes unless and until we work together to resist the intolerable. As Robert Schilling said back in 1886, the intelligent citizens have a weapon mightier than the ball of the bayonet, the ballot. That weapon is ours to use in an election that is barely 4 weeks away. It will be a historic election by any measure, and its outcome will be determined in large part by our ability to reclaim and renew the spirit of 1886. Please welcome Michael Gordon.
Thank you, John. Like Larry Penn, I maybe have retired from teaching at UWM, but I can't imagine that I would ever give up my membership in my union. Once a union member, always a union member, and I'm still very much involved in AFT Wisconsin Local 3535, a public employee union, incidentally. So I take personally not only the lessons from Act 10 and Scott Walker, but I also have always taken personally the lessons from Bayview and from the too many other incidents in which working people have, in some cases, given up their lives, but in other cases, more often the case, undergone really tremendous struggles on my behalf, even though, of course, they didn't know it would be on my behalf. And so I wanted to just briefly elaborate a little bit on John's talk, in which he tried to, and I think did so very well, tried to imagine what workers did with the lessons that they learned from Bayview, the incident in Bayview in 1886. He's absolutely right, of course, as he always is. That one response was to turn to politics, getting involved in the People's Party. Now, not all of the workers back then got involved in politics, to be sure, but enough of them did to make a difference. Some of them stayed in the Knights of Labor, some of them stayed in their unions that were affiliated with the American Federation of Labor. Some of them later probably joined the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World, and maybe their descendants joined the CIO unions. But they stayed active, and they had to. And of course, the reason they had to has to do with the same reason that people felt that they had to get involved in the 8-hour day campaign to press for their rights. I was thinking, though, that another way in which, another lesson perhaps, that people drew from the events of 1886, although we don't know for sure what lessons people learned from that event, but it's clear that pretty quickly a lot of workers understood that in order to be successful, they had to build coalitions with people who were working people, but maybe not union members, with people who were not working people, reform-minded, perhaps middle-class people. And so we see in the 1890s, of course, in 1892 and 1896, workers reached out to join with farmers and others in the populist movement. Or in the early years of the 1900s, from roughly 1900 to 1915, the progressive movement. Workers reached out to join hands with reform-minded people who were as seriously concerned as a lot of working people were about the need to get legislation passed that would protect women and children workers of all kinds, for that matter, in which we saw the passage of important pieces of legislation here in Wisconsin and elsewhere. And in the 1930s, workers also reached out, of course, to become part of a big coalition, the so-called New Deal coalition, the Democratic Party. They joined hands with white ethnic workers of all kinds, African Americans, women, and even, oddly, at least for a time, Southern landowners. They were, of course, an important part of the so-called New Deal coalition. They would leave in the 1960s. Protestants of all kinds, Catholics and Jews. This is a really important coalition that, like the other coalition, was aimed not just in getting pieces of legislation passed like the National Labor Relations Act and the Fair Labor Standards Act, that specifically were aimed at working people, the problems of working people. But as is always the case with working people, they were interested in getting pieces of legislation passed and policies developed that would help all kinds of people, whether they were union members or non-union members. And so you see this idea of coalition building, of course, continuing down to the present day, especially in Madison, but elsewhere too. Not just workers who turned out in Madison, all kinds of people who understood that justice for one is not justice for all. If you want justice for all, you have to form strong coalitions, whether it has to do with workers, the environment, or whatever. So that's one of the lessons, at least, that I think that a lot of working people learned in 1886 and afterwards too. The importance of building coalitions. And I think that that's obvious today and will continue to be obvious in the future too. I think, and finally, one of the other lessons that I have learned from teaching labor history for so many years is, of course, there have been too many occasions in the past in which primarily working people, but not just working people, who have taken to the streets to demand simple rights like an 8-hour day, for heaven's sakes. What could be more simple than that? How many times people, of course, have been gunned down or clubbed off the streets. Women, too. 1912 in Lawrence, Massachusetts, the so-called Bread and Roses strike. Women and children. And there's this whole litany of these kinds of events in which people, again, struggling for basic decency. And really, what I think they were struggling for was to make people live up to the promise and the premise of the American Revolution. 1877, 1886, 1892, 1894, 1912, and on and on and on. These are the people to whom I owe a debt and always will. Thanks.
So, you know, in just a couple of years ago, I think we all saw that many of those of us that we work with forgot some of those lessons of history. And they didn't turn out to the polls. And while change is typically slow, all of a sudden change became something instantaneous when it comes to taking away people's rights and really taking us backward. And so I want to talk a little bit about the impact of Act 10 as I see it from the front lines. And how it's taking us back to where we were in terms of our struggle. Is there anybody here from the press still here, or did they tire out?
Right here.
All right, good. So I'm going to take you over to Oconomowoc, which is sort of the epicenter of some of the activity that we have going on right now within WEAC. There we have a superintendent who I think has aspirations probably to be the next state superintendent, who has never been a friend of unions, has never been a friend of her employees, who just recently laid off 15 teachers. Of those 15 teachers, 6 of them have been active union officers or were current union officers, and whose principal at the high school posed the alternatives the following way. He said, over the next few months, likely after the recall election, I suspect, over the next few months, what you're going to see our neighboring districts do is slashing staff. He used the term mass staff cuts, cutting programs for kids, increasing class sizes, all of which, of course, Scott Walker has indicated would not happen under his budget, right? In the alternative, he said, we're going to preserve programs, which they're not. They are cutting programs. And what we're going to do is cut high school staff and have the remaining high school staff lose all of their, what we call preparatory instructional time. Many of you may or may not know that teachers on average, and 2 recent studies verified this, that just came out, one from the University of Illinois, that teachers work between 10.5 and 11.5 hours a day during the school year. They don't have an 8-hour day. So, you know, the right and all of their talk radio folks are always pointing out that teachers get 3 months off during the summer, et cetera, et cetera. But what they don't tell you is that, their average work week is 58 hours plus a week. Well, when you take away that preparatory time, that's the equivalent of a speed up, right? It's, again, lengthening that work day, making it even longer. And so, hence the tie back to what happened in terms of the Bayview tragedy right here in Milwaukee. So we see some of those same things going on in, of all places, an educational institution. One that instead of standing up for her teachers and standing up for public education, the superintendent in Oconomowoc, Pat Newdecker, would rather pose the alternatives as being one of mass staff cuts or increasing the workday for her remaining staff. That, to me, is not the choice. Certainly organized labor made a decision way back in the 1920s and 30s that wasn't going to be our choice, that we were going to redistribute income and wealth in this country, and we were going to do it by organizing. And that's what we need to do again now. I hope that our members and all of those of us who feel similar have learned a lesson from what happened 2 years ago, and that is we always have to remain vigilant. We need to participate at the ballot box. We need to organize our family, friends, and neighbors and reach out to them and talk to them about the values that we believe in and get them to vote. We know our adversaries are doing this, and if we don't do the same, we'll lose. So it's up to us. It's up to all of us to get out there and organize like we've never organized before in the next month to make sure we turn the state back around and restore Wisconsin's values to where they were before. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. You've heard from us. We'd like to hear from you. Yes?
What if the only thing that works is a strike? To the union people. What if the only thing that really works is a strike?
What if the only thing that works is a strike?
What kind of cut? Before, we should have done this 2 years ago when it first came down. We should have walked out. Teachers should have. Oh, I see. Teachers should have walked out when it first came down.
Well, you know, I'm proud to say that one of my units did walk out. Watertown, which walked out in the 70s to get collective bargaining rights, did walk out then. Unfortunately, the decision in terms of what to do statewide is certainly above my pay grade, and it wasn't the decision that was made, you know, by the leaders in AFSCME and WEAC. I'm not going to stand up here and second guess them, I guess. It may come to that. Clearly now, as you may or may not know, it's going to be very difficult because Scott Walker has embedded in Act 10 provisions that quite literally will result in the discharge of people who engage in that form of protest, even for short periods of time. Now, that same threat existed back at the time of Hortonville and the time of Watertown. It may come to that, but as you all know, it's not something that the people here in this room can impose. It's something that the workers who are in those facilities have to feel and have to come up with. I mean, we can help provide the leadership and certainly the support, but it's something that they themselves have to make a decision about. Thus far, they haven't done that, at least for the long term. But I am proud to say that in the working class Republican town of Watertown, one of my units did walk out, and they did a great job.
Thanks, Bill. Talk down there.
My name is Philip Blank, and I want to tie some of these things together. I was president of Local 212 MATC when we won collective bargaining, the first in schools in the state, the first in higher education. You better believe I'd take Act 10 personally. Our union enabled me, and our bargaining enabled me to have a dignified and relatively comfortable retirement. Reading John Nichols' The S Word, I commend it to all of you. Now, in September, there's going to be 2 100th anniversaries of MATC, the People's College, and Frank Zeidler. Now, some of you are aware that we have an annual Frank P. Zeidler Memorial Lecture. John Gerda was the second one. He gave excerpts from that during his earlier presentation. Jeremy Scahill was the first, John Nichols was the third, and last year a professor from Madison spoke on why public employee unions are necessary. Now, in September will be the anniversary, 100th anniversary of Frank Zeidler's birth, and the 100th anniversary of MATC. I'm hoping those two can be drawn together. I want to invite all of you to the lecture on Frank's 100th birthday by a second Mayor Zeidler, September 20th, 7:30, Centennial Hall. But look, that 100th anniversary isn't going to be nearly as significant unless we can win these elections. So I urge you to help get out the vote. Incidentally, any of you might not know about the lectures, you can get them by going to mptv.org. They're all excellent lectures. Let's do it.
Thank you, Phil. Any questions or comments? Yes, sir. We should all be so spry.
I'm just concerned about history repeating itself. How can we enact all the reforms that are necessary, but not at the same time arm our opponents for the next election cycle?
Well, that's a strategic question of major importance. You know, I think what's going on is the pendulum keeps on swinging back and forth, and now it's gone into the stratosphere on the right-hand side. You know, we need to at least, you know, push that thing back into the middle. But I think you're right.
So I think first is shining a light on what's going on in the workplaces that have been affected. So we intend to do that, and we're doing that now in Oconomowoc. We're saying, look at this, what they did to these 15 teachers. Non-renewed them, they have no rights to return, some of them with 29 years experience, perfect performance evaluations, no prior discipline, yet here's what happened with one of these teachers at 29 years. They're given a hearing 15 minutes long before a board, okay? 15 minutes long to present their life's work, right? No ability to cross-examine witnesses. The employer writes the rules for the hearing. There's no just cause standard. They can apply whatever standard they so desire, and we're not confident that they're going to apply anything fair. To us, if it looks and sounds and appears to be a kangaroo court, it probably is one, and we're going to shine a light on it. So first of all is educating the public. Second of all, I think, is not doing things that will antagonize the middle. So, you know, some of you had mentioned this issue about strike earlier. So, you know, I'm sure our leaders had that in the back of their mind. You know, if we do certain things and go too far, are we going to antagonize the people that we need at the ballot box, you know, come November or come June? And I'm sure that was part of their calculus. I know it's part of our calculus when we were in Madison, when we organized these demonstrations. They were peaceful, they were joyful. We had a great turnout, lots of families, lots of kids. Very different than protests that you might see in Greece, for example. So I think we've been careful to certainly go in that direction. We're going to continue to try and do the same thing and hopefully bring the public around. As you all know, we've got a real challenge when it comes to the major newspaper in this city.
No kidding.
You know, Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, which has not been our friend, and I've stopped buying it for that reason. And encourage other people to do the same.
I think certainly that outrageous acts provoke outrage. And I think that's fuel, that's energy. At the same time, I think we need to kind of appeal to core Wisconsin values, you know, dignity, justice, fairness, opportunity. You know, those things have resonance, you know, with a much larger audience, you know, than kind of just this kind of mutual antagonism, where it just ends up sort of beating one side, beating the other side, and that's a very difficult, needle to thread, but I think key to success in the long term, and to get us off, this constant swing back and forth. Yes, ma'am. Would you like a microphone?
Yeah. I'm not so good at jumping up like Bill. But, this is more than just today and tomorrow. We've got to think in terms of the future, in terms of the long term. 1886 is the anniversary of the Supreme Court decision that made corporations people.
Yes.
Corporate personhood started in 1886. And we've got a long haul to change that, to change the philosophy, to move our country back, to move our country forward, not backward, and to take our Constitution and make it include human rights, because that's what's missing. And so, there's going to be a march on Thursday, sponsored by the Franciscan Action Network, and they're going to start at Pere Marquette Park at 11:30, and then they're going to wind up at Cathedral Square, and the speakers, although it's the Franciscans sponsoring it, Move to Amend is also a co-sponsor, and the Human Rights Network will be involved in that program as well. So we're going to form a coalition between the religious and the lay people, and there's going to be a referendum on the constitutional amendment to change corporate personhood. The Move to Amend is working with some representatives of the Common Council to introduce a resolution so that hopefully there will be a referendum on the ballot to change that. But that's just the first step. We've got to change the culture of our society so that it moves forward and doesn't go backward. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. What time on Thursday, Rose?
11. It'll start at 11:30 with the march, but then people like me can go to Cathedral Square at 12:45, where there'll be a rally.
And the march will begin where? At 11:30?
At Pere Marquette Park.
Pere Marquette Park, which is on the river just
As many of you as can
at Kilburn.
come should be there.
Yeah, Christine?
Do I need a microphone?
Yeah.
I just want to add, I came in a little bit late, so I don't know if anybody mentioned this at all. Steve mentioned that we have to continue to be vigilant on these issues. 2010, I think it was like 41% of union households voted Republican.
Oh,
Yes, including many public workers in Milwaukee County who wanted to get Scott Walker out of Milwaukee County.
Yep.
So we need to make sure that never, ever happens again. And I just wanted to add that. I want to introduce real quickly Dale Milk, who is one of our great progressive activists in this area.
I just want to mention we have a group for Bayview and the South Shore suburbs. It's called Grassroots at South Shore. It's modeled after Grassroots at North Shore. And there's also groups Grassroots Progressive 28, and there's a Wauwatosa Grassroots. And basically, we organize around issues that mean something to the community, and we work closely with all the progressive candidates in all the suburbs and in Bayview. And we're going to be working on the recall election. We're going to be getting ready for Get Out the Vote. So we're going to have a meeting at the Cudahy Library. It's going to be on Wednesday, May 17th at 6 p.m. So you can go to the Cudahy Library. When again, May 17th at 6 p.m. and you can find out how you can get involved with the recall elections. And we'll give you all the information you need to help out. So.
Wednesday is not the 17th.
Oh, I'm sorry, 16th. Wednesday, May 16th at the Cudahy Library, 6 p.m. Okay, thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you, Dale. Anybody else want to? Arthur. Art Heitzer, another long-time member of our ad hoc committee.
Thanks so much. So I want to talk about solidarity for a couple of minutes, including international solidarity. So I came in late, so I didn't hear all what John covered, but the event that we commemorated today and Haymarket in Chicago, the Haymarket riot supposedly, that's what led to May Day being the International Day of Worker Solidarity. In Europe, the Second International, I think, met and said, what are we going to do to have solidarity with American workers? And May Day was, of course, the deadline for the 8-hour day from the Knights of Labor. So that's where May Day was picked as the International Day of Worker Solidarity, which is, of course, recognized virtually every country in the world except for here. The same thing with International Women's Day. Origin in the United States, state holiday almost everywhere in the world. I give roses out to my staff and friends who are female. I went to Pick and Save on Lion. The woman there is from Pakistan, so she knows about International Women's Day because she's from Pakistan. People in the United States pretty much don't. You may know that Newt Gingrich and some of the conservatives have a big thing about American exceptionalism. They're really big. Our country isn't the same as the rest of the world. We have some special history, some special principles. The rules don't apply to us. You've probably heard Mitt Romney saying he's against the vision that Barack Obama has because that's a European socialist vision, whereas Mitt Romney's for an American vision. Okay? You can see underlines of, well, you know, Obama's not really American, he's not really as white as we would like American presidents to be, etc. So that's a very dangerous thing, and the right wing is really pushing how we're special. Of course, when it comes to corporations, free trade, all the rules should be down, they should be able to go anywhere they want to. But when it comes to questions of social policy, should there be universal health care? Should there be guaranteed vacations of 6 weeks like is common in Germany and most other places in Europe? America's different. We're going to float or sink on our own, and so we should think about that a little bit. And finally, you heard Mary Barrett talk about how he thinks Scott Walker is going to target private sector unions if he gets to survive as governor. A number of us have seen a clip, hopefully it'll be made public within days, in Janesville. There's a business-oriented person who comes up to Scott Walker right after he's elected, says, Wisconsin's too much of a union state, what are you going to do about it? And Scott says, well, we're going to start with the public sector unions. We're going to start with public sector bargaining, and then we'll deal with the rest of it. We're waiting to get the clip released, so hopefully the rest of the state will see it on TV. But if you don't stand together, you fall, you know, like Benjamin Franklin says, you either hang together or we'll hang separately. And that goes for private, public sector, and certainly the sense that we are not somehow unique in the world, and other policies and countries have developed things we can learn from and not be afraid of. Thank you.
Another couple of comments. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to know, I go to these things and look at the age. How are you motivating the youth?
How are we motivating the youth? Labor history.
Especially since I know for a fact, having worked for Target for 2 hours, I made it through 2 hours of their training, and in that time they showed me 2 propaganda videos touting the evils of unions to our youth. So with employers and companies doing things like that, how do we reach these younger members of our society to help them understand the truth about it when they're being told that if someone comes up and talks to you in Target about unionizing, that means that your boss will no longer be able to talk to you about anything or be of any help to you? I don't know about the rest of you, but I do not.
Great question. So, you know, the Wisconsin Labor History Society, along with a number of the legislators that were here today, sponsored legislation to teach labor history in the schools because we knew that children and kids and young adults were not getting that kind of an education about the value of unions and why unions were important, how they can be important in terms of creating and sustaining a middle class. That legislation was passed, and now, of course, teachers have no protection whatsoever in terms of being fired, and so it's going to be very difficult to implement. It's not that we haven't made an effort to do it, it's that we were outflanked. It's that our adversaries took a look at the picture and they said, you know, how can we outflank these minor achievements that we've, and I say minor because in the scheme of things they are. These achievements that the left has made in the last, or the previous election in 2008, and they said, the way to do it is just take back power and then implement a radical right agenda, and that's exactly what they did. So we're certainly reaching out, we're trying to reach out, and we want to do a better job within our own locals. I know Watertown, for example, the teachers that led that effort to the strike there in Watertown were young teachers, and they're coming up through the ranks and becoming leaders there. So they are now seeing the impact of Act 10 and how it takes them back, and what protections they really had under a union contract. We're trying to cultivate this. Unfortunately, we're overwhelmed, and we're always welcome to new ideas from people such as yourself.
I think the obvious message is to keep at it. The Labor History Society has been active for years in doing everything from essay contests for high school students, have some impact on unions in their families, to proceeds from this event, paying for videos and books that we put in schools that will give some background on labor history. Things I've done in the past, a book called Making in Milwaukee turned into a TV program, and we had about, I ended up with a website with about 250 pages of lesson plans and materials, including labor and industrial history in the Milwaukee area. So you keep on doing that. You just keep at it. You know, it's generations are always changing. You're always moving forward. People kind of age into a higher, some of our demographic where we might be more interested. But you've got to keep on working on the feeder. You know, what's coming up. That is absolutely vital. You can't have a future if you don't let the present know about the past.
Speaking of the president right now, we have all of our people from Milwaukee and Occupy Milwaukee have just come back from Fond du Lac, where we had our statewide General Assembly, and they're having their weekly General Assemblies right now, starting at 5:30 at Peace Action. I would encourage anybody who has an event to announce, a rally to announce, a march to announce, please head over to Peace Action to let these young people know what is going on with the rest of the activist community. We're working with unions, we're working with Occupy the Village, we're working with the local civil rights and human rights activist organizations, and really trying to push change. So, you know, just speaking for myself as someone who's occupied the Capitol, as someone who pitched a tent and occupied in Milwaukee, you know, I think Occupy Milwaukee is encourage some of the older folks to reach out to the young people in Occupy and let them know what's going on in the larger activist community and with the campuses and with the other communities.
Okay, thank you. Peace Action is on Keith. Peace Action still on Keith?
Yeah, 1001.
1001 East Keith. And now a word from another one of our stalwarts, David Thomas.
Thank you, John. Are there any teachers here? Okay, we have a video on DVD of the story of Milwaukee's 8-hour strikes. We have enough copies here that we can give them to teachers that are here. So just stop over here at the desk or see me. It's newly digitally remastered. You've seen it before. The quality's 100 times better. So
there's an offer. Thank you, David. We have enough energy, talent, initiative here to probably talk until 7 o'clock this evening. There is a time to commemorate a tragedy. There is also time to celebrate solidarity. So let's adjourn to the bar, bring our refreshments back, and talk for as long as we like. Thank you very much.